Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Ed.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, uh, thankful that Valerie introduced us.
Yeah, Valerie's great.
How do you know her?
She used to live in Austin. I live in Austin as well, and she worked for. I'm a retired pediatric neurologist, and she came to work for us as a pediatric nurse practitioner for several years before she moved.
Ah, I see. Well, that's great. I love those connections.
Yeah,
And
and then
now you're
She called me maybe I don't know 4 or 5 years ago, telling me that she wanted to start a career as an author and was asking for some hints. And there you go.
and she's off and running.
She
And
is indeed. Yeah,
yeah, I'm really happy for her, and I enjoy getting to know her over the last couple of months. That I met her in August. We did a an event together, a virtual
yeah,
event, and that was fun.
yeah.
So,
She's a great lady.
so as we've already started basically, but uh, let's give let's give our audience a little idea of who you are. Just give us a little sketch of who Jeff Kerr is.
Well, yeah, as I mentioned, I'm a retired pediatric neurologist, but more recently I've become an author. I've been writing for about 20 years. I started out with a few nonfiction books before pivoting to fiction, and most recently I'm engaged in writing a crime fiction series about a rural Texas sheriff's deputy named Adam Cash. Book 5 will be coming out after the new year.
These are popular genres for people to write. I used to live in Wyoming, and you have C.J. Box,
Oh gosh, yeah,
yeah,
and Craig
and
Johnson.
Craig Johnson. I mean, they've just cranked those books out, and now they've been able to have them picked up for production as series. And
No, they're two of my favorite authors. And then there's another one who served to inspire me to become an independent author named Jeff Carson, who lives up in I think Northwest Colorado, and he's got a series about a Colorado um, sheriff and detective who lives in a rural area. He's going on about 22 books now, so
wow,
yeah,
you got a
he's
lot of
doing quite well.
writing to catch up on.
Right.
So, what was it that first gave you the indication you want to write in the crime genre?
Well, I was, when I started writing fiction, I never started out to be an author. And when I wrote the couple of nonfiction books, I realized I want to keep doing this. But one of those books took me about 2 years to write, and I spent every spare moment in a library somewhere. And I realized I just can't do that for the rest of my life because I'm not a history professor. I can't go send graduate students to the library to do my research for me. But I wanted to keep writing. So I wrote a couple of fiction books, and then discovered this guy, Jeff Carson, and his advice was you need a series. And I got to thinking about that, and I've always enjoyed crime fiction, mysteries, all that sort of thrillers. Um, and so I figured I would settle on something that I enjoy reading because I would probably enjoy writing it. And then I realized I wanted to set it not in a big city where I'm less familiar about how things might work from a legal standpoint and a mystery standpoint. So I placed it in a small town, a fictional small town that's based on the town of Blanco, which is a town that my wife and I spend a lot of time in. And yeah, it took off from there. The first book came out, I don't know, about 2.5 years ago, and my goal is 2 books a year, and so far I've been sticking pretty close to that.
That's pretty remarkable. How many words is a kind of an average novel for you? How many do you keep?
Mine have all been right at 70,000, give or
Uh-huh.
take a few. Other books in the genre probably run maybe up to 80 or 90,000, but not much beyond that from what I see. Science fiction books, those are the ones, and fantasy, those are the ones that tend to get to 120, 130,000.
Yeah, because they're creating a real kind of a different world context,
Absolutely, yeah.
and which takes a lot more imagination description to create those worlds.
Right,
That's
right.
the word where I was looking for was creating a different world.
Yeah.
Um, well, I'm interested in that because I've been writing for about 20 years, but it was mostly it began. I began as a newspaper columnist And then I started doing blogging, web blogging. And then in 2018, I published my first book, and it's a nonfiction leadership book, and
Hmm.
wrote some short books during COVID, and I've recently this year decided I'm going to write a novel based on the research I'm doing for another book on time, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just writing as it comes to me,
Yeah.
and so it's an interesting journey to be on. And I've been listening to, I've watched other people like yourself who have gone off and done this, and trying to figure out what is that mindset that comes to you every day that says, okay, how does this story keep developing, and how do I make this story develop in such a way that people want to keep reading, chapter after chapter.
Sure.
What do you have a secret to that?
Well, yeah, there's no easy answer to that. My first fiction book was a historical fiction novel based on the research I had done in writing my book about Austin's founding. And so that, maybe that was a way to ease into fiction because I already knew what was there and what I would be drawing on. But after that, of course, I switched gears and got into this crime fiction. I had to make up plots and everything, and it was a struggle at first. And what happened to me is I was introduced to an excellent editor, a guy named by the name of John Payne, and he was able to help me really iron out, flesh out the characters, flesh out the plot, make it much more interesting. And without that, without somebody guiding me like that, my books would not be nearly as good as they are. And I think each book has gotten successfully better as I've been able to pick up a lot of these lessons on how to craft a story and how to craft a mystery that keeps it interesting, has enough suspects, but doesn't give away too much until the end, and has enough, plot twists along the way to keep people reading.
My oldest son is a writer, and he self-published his first novel a couple of years ago, and he wrote a he's writing a series of novels about an American farm family, but he's writing this series over about a year, 150 years. So each book is going to be a different generation of this family,
Yeah,
and as a way of capturing what the character of the family farm was, say in Jacksonian America, as opposed to modern day America or post World War II America, and so he's published the first one, which has to do with has the son of the current generation of the family, um, not wanting to go fight in the Second World War. His commitment is to his family, and his commitment to the farm. And it's this is the farm was this essentially before the mechanization of the farm, and so
yeah,
they have farm animals, draft horses and things like that. And but he joins the reserves and immediately gets activated.
of course.
It spends it spends 3.5 years in the military, and finishes out the war in Germany, and and he comes home and realizes that his experience of fighting he cannot share with his family because they will not understand. And his girlfriend has stayed with him, but he also understands that she will never understand the experiences and the traumatic things that he was required to do as a soldier.
Yeah,
And he comes home to find that his father has had to put the farm in debt because they've had to mechanize by powered vehicles and tractors because the U.S. government wants them to make more food for.
sure. Yeah.
And so he comes home, and it's the title of the book is Victory Ruins. So
Great title.
yeah, but he started when he was 12, and so he's 40 now. So this is, quite a few years ago. And he asked for his own computer. This is mid 90s. He asked for his own computer. And so we bought him a used computer, and he started teaching himself to write at the age of 12. And he wrote You'll appreciate this. He wrote a 175,000 word alternative history of World War II in
Wow.
over about 2 years. But he was trying to teach himself how to write dialogue and how to write
Yeah.
battle scenes and things like that. And he's continued to write, and I'm very proud of him for that.
Yeah, no kidding. Sounds
So
like he's got a bright future ahead of him.
I hope so. It's you got to stick at it. I mean, it's no one's going to hand you a contract. You got to go find it, and you got to do all of that, as you know.
I do. When I was switching over to fiction, I tried to find an agent for a couple of years because I had an agent for some of my nonfiction stuff. And I finally realized I just was too old to spend 10, 15, 20 years banging my head against the wall trying to get somebody to agree with me that my books were any good. And that's when and we're lucky these days because self-publishing is an option and it's a viable option. I mean,
Yeah.
15, 20 years ago when it first became a thing, I think a lot of people looked down on it. But there are a lot of very successful and a lot of very excellent independent authors out there. There's a lot of stuff that's maybe not as good, but there's plenty of really good stuff out there, and it's wide open for anybody that wants to get into it. But you have to do it, you have to work hard at it, and you got to do it right. You got to put out a professional product that's as good as you can make it.
Is there, uh, I'm going to use a strange word for it. Is there kind of a club for you guys that are crime fiction writers? I mean, do you all associate with each other at all?
Well, there's online groups that I'm part of. I don't I could probably be a little more active in those, but sure, I keep tabs on it that way. I This will be the second year I'm going next week to the Author Nation conference, which is the biggest one in the country, I think, for independent authors, and there'll be a lot of crime fiction folks there, so I'm looking forward to interacting with them.
That's great. And as you have now written your fifth in this series, how how far out are you now projecting? How far out can you see the story of this sheriff's deputy going?
Well, I don't have a definite endpoint, and I just recently polled my readers on that question. How long can a series be? And the consensus seemed to be is as long as you keep the characters and the stories interesting, it can be as long as you want it to be. I started my protagonist, Adam Cash, out young. He was 28 in the first book because I wanted to be able to age him and yet have there be a lot of books in the series if that's what I wanted. So I'm imagining there'll be at least 10, but if I write the 10th and feel an 11th one forming in my brain, then I'll go ahead and move with that as well. The Jeff Carson series I mentioned, as I think I said, he's got 22 books now in that series.
And I think Box's Joe Pickett series got about 20 in
Oh,
it.
he's got a bunch. Now, a lot of times what you'll see is those guys start to spin characters off. Michael Connolly has been a master at that. He's
Yeah,
behind the Bosch series, and yet he's got the Renee Ballard series going now. He's got the Lincoln Lawyer series, and it's all part of the same universe. But yeah, if he gets tired of writing about Bosch, he can switch gears and write about one of these other ones. Bosch is probably near the end of the road because he's in the 70s and has cancer. So
yeah,
which is I think why Renee Ballard has taken a bigger role these days.
yeah. And I think the Lincoln Lawyer is it's a good. He's a unique attorney character,
Oh
I think.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And well, it shows that what this is. It shows to me that you're developing your skills of insight into human character as you go through this, and I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that I mean you write a story, and as you're writing the story, you're thinking about something, and you got this other little notepad over here for the next story. You see where there could be something relevant to the next story that
You
has
bet.
taken place. That
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and is it the sort of thing where with the same character through several books that you're allowing the memory of some past situation in a different book to be brought into the current book? Do you do that kind of thing?
I have done that. I try not to do too much because I want each book. I want people to be able to pick up any book in the series and read it without having had to read all the ones that came before that. Most series seem to be that way in crime fiction. But of course, you're going to refer to things that happened earlier. Then you have to explain a little bit. But you don't want too much of that either. You don't want to recap every book in the next book that you're writing. But the ones I like the most to read are those that not only have really interesting plots, but really dive into the depth of the characters, the protagonist especially, but also the people in his or her universe. And as I say, I think Michael Connelly is a master at that. Craig Johnson, C.J. Box. There's another author I've discovered recently, Adrian McKenty, an Irish guy, writes about an Irish detective that I think is just fabulous. And I think all those books I enjoy because it's not just the story; it's really describing those characters in great depth.
Did you ever consider writing a similar type of book, but having the protagonist a physician?
I've been asked that a lot because I'm a retired physician, and I thought about that briefly, but I just realized, I had a really good career. I enjoyed it very much. It was very rewarding, but I was done. I was one of those. I'm not one of those that wanted to keep doing medicine until I was 100. And I felt the same about it when I started writing books. I just was done with that world for now, and I'm not going to get back to it in the future. I've got an in because Cash's sister, who I haven't yet brought into the book series, I've got her in a short story, but she's a nurse in Houston. So I can always
You have a little
pivot
bit
over
there.
towards her. Yeah.
Well, what I was wondering about is whether your knowledge is so deep and so specific that it is hard to separate yourself from the depth of knowledge you have so that you can actually tell a story that is relevant to most people,
Well,
because
that may well be true. And the other thing that holds me up is I'm a stickler for being as accurate as you can. And if you're making up a story that involves medicine, you'd have to stretch the truth a lot. There's a lot of stuff in there that probably wouldn't be all that accurate. There could be, but it's just not. It just hasn't been something that I've had a burning desire to explore right now.
well, I guess if you watch any of these medical shows on TV, that's, you can't depend on what they're
Oh
presenting to
gosh,
you as as
years ago,
medical
my
truth.
daughter wouldn't let. She threw me out of the room once when I was watching Grey's Anatomy with her because I turned to her and I said, when I was a resident, we didn't all sleep with each other like that. And she said, "Dad, get out."
Yeah, I can imagine. But um, now it would creating writing a novel like that, where you have an ensemble of characters set in a particular place in a specific context, where they're coming to that context, and that becomes kind of the set play piece for the story itself. How would that be in writing the kind of things that you're writing? Is that a totally different approach to writing a story than what you're doing?
You mean bringing in multiple characters?
Well, I'm thinking, like the great TV series ER. They the that emergency room was the context of the story,
Right.
and throughout the 20 years or so, they had different characters coming in and out,
I see. Yeah.
and I'm wondering if it is possible. This is just way I think to create that kind of series where the setting, the place is the real character, and all these people are the ones who create the kind of the dynamism of that character.
I think that could be done. Maybe not in a small town setting like I've got, more big city type police show. Because
Yeah,
there have been police TV shows where it's kind of the same. Hill Street Blues years ago, I remember
right.
was kind of like that. But I don't know that I would do that with what I've got, where it's just set in a real small town. I've tried to have a lot of characters around the protagonist, and a lot of them take active roles to different degrees in each story. I can see down the road maybe spinning off a series with one or two of them. But for now, my protagonist, he's the guy that the stories center around.
Um, and this is something I've always been curious about with you guys that write these long series of novels. Do you think about the possibility of turning your work into television series? Is that something that sits in the back of your mind? How would this translate to the screen if someone comes to me and says this is a good story, we'd like to produce this for the screen? Is
And
how
I would be all over that. That would be fantastic. Um, I've over the years I've written several screenplays and I know how that works. Um, and I do think that this book series would translate into a very interesting TV show. The difficulty is finding somebody that wants to do it.
Yeah.
And what you really have to do, I think, would be to really build a large platform. Got to get a big readership, and make sure that people are able to see your work. It happens, but it's a long shot.
So the so I would guess that the people like Taylor Sheridan are few and far between, and once they catch on, they do really really well for a long period of time.
Yeah, Taylor Sheridan right now is he's the big head honcho of all that stuff. My suspicion is he's kind of coming up with his own stories, but yeah,
Yeah,
other like the Michael Connelly books that got turned into TV series. A lot of those popular TV shows, detective shows in particular, are based on somebody's book somewhere. And yeah, I think it takes having an excellent series, a large readership, and then a little bit of luck, and then somebody who's in a position to do so, finding your book and turning it into a TV show.
so is it what takes precedence, plot or character?
Well, crime fiction, I think, is more plot driven. You have to have interesting characters, and I want to dive into them. But really, when people are reading a crime fiction story, I think they're most interested in being entertained by the plot twists and the resolution and how the protagonist solves the crime.
And when you first started reading this kind of stuff, who were you reading? Who was your inspiration?
Well, I've been reading Michael Connelly for a good 20 years now. Even before that, I read a lot of Elmore Leonard's books.
Yeah,
He started out as a Western writer, but and wrote a
yeah,
lot of stuff. A lot of it made into movies. But then the last half of his career was all crime fiction, including one of my favorites, Raylan Givens, the Justified protagonist.
right, right. That's a
Um,
great series.
yeah, and before that, I remember when I was in high school, even my dad, he read a lot of crime fiction, and he had a bunch of books by Joseph Wambaugh on the shelf that I read.
And is this a is this something that's suited to this point in time? And is it sustainable? Is it going to last, or is it will there be uh, some kind of change in what people are looking for in novels? In as a I guess you would call it pulp fiction. Do you consider yourself a pulp fiction writer?
No, I'm not sure exactly what that. I've never been sure exactly what that term means, but no, I would not describe myself as pulp fiction. Um, to me, that has a little bit of a negative connotation. I could be wrong, but I don't. I think crime fiction stories and mysteries in particular, mysteries will always be popular. And mystery is probably one of the most popular genres out there. And a good crime fiction book is half crime fiction and half mystery typically, because you don't know who did it a lot of times, or you're trying to figure out how they're going to figure out the crime.
So how do you craft a mystery story? I mean, I really don't know. I know I've read many of them, but as the author, how do you start to create some kind of mystery story that then becomes a book that you write? Where do you start with that?
Usually, I have like one thing in my mind and realize, oh, that's something to develop a story around. Like with this book that's going to come out, it's called The Voice Thief. And I was listening to a podcast about 6, 8 months ago where they were talking about AI generated voice cloning, basically, where you record somebody's voice and then you can have that voice have anything come out of a computer in that voice.
Right.
Um, and I remember the person in the podcast said, "Yeah, someday somebody's going to write a good crime fiction book about that." And I thought, "Yeah, you're right. I'm going to do that." So I just started thinking about that, and over the next week, couple of weeks, how could that be used by a bad guy to do whatever nefarious things he had in mind? And that's how this next book, it's called The Voice Thief. That's how that came about. Sometimes I'll hear about something in the news or just remember something that kind of spurs my thinking. Years ago, I don't know if you remember the woman Madeline Murray O'Hare.
Yeah.
When I moved to Austin in the early '90s, she lived about half a mile from me. and subsequently she was kidnapped, forced to withdraw a bunch of money and buy a whole bunch of gold coins and give them to her kidnapper, who then murdered her and dismembered her and buried her in South Texas somewhere. And so I took that. I didn't want to use that exact story, um, but the idea of gold coins intrigued me enough that I developed a plot around that. About at the beginning of the book, there's a mysterious explosion. When they search the dead man's body, they find gold coins in his pocket that are worth a lot of money, and they wonder where they came from. So
Where
often it's just a single thing like that that gets me thinking.
um, I've become this year to become a fan of Cormac McCarthy's work, particularly No Country for Old Men, which I identify a lot with.
Right.
Um, he doesn't really write series, but he is writing crime stories. But his are different than, say, what people like Craig Johnson and Michael Connelly and those guys are writing. And how would you characterize the way he approaches a similar kind of story?
I'd say that his books are different from most authors. The good guys don't always win. In fact, they usually lose in his books. And I think I find I've read several of his books. I find them really well written and also very depressing.
Yeah. Oh
Blood
yeah.
Meridian is supposed to be his classic book, and it's a Western, and I read that, and I hardly could get to the end because everybody gets killed in
Yeah.
brutal ways. Um, so I think he's writing for a completely different audience. I don't think you pick up a Cormac McCarthy book thinking, oh, let's see how this crime gets solved. It's more
Not,
about
you're not going to
what
take it to the
drives
beat.
people to commit crimes and how it influences how it affects life.
Yeah, I see it. I see it that way. I see it as as a reflection of a certain segment of people, and it gives me insight into that segment of people that I don't have relationships with people like the people that he writes about,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
which
Yeah, a lot of it's pretty terrifying stuff. I mean, No Country for Old Men, to me, in large part, is just about the randomness of things that can happen to people and how one bad decision can affect a lot of innocent folks. And it's a frightening story. Done very well in that movie and the book.
yeah, I totally agree with you. So you're able to write two books a year. That's pretty significant, I would say. Um, So how many hours a day are you spending writing? What's your pattern for writing a book?
Well, I spend most days spending some time on writing. And usually what I do is I get up and go to a local coffee shop because I find I distract myself too much if I'm at home and spend anywhere from 2 to 4 hours writing. And I don't have a specific word count goal in mind. I just write until I sort of run out of steam later in the morning and then come home and then maybe later in the day I'll pick it up. But mornings are typically devoted to writing.
Do you have something in mind when you approach the writing process of what the relationship between dialogue and exposition is? Is that a question that you're even asking?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I've actually kind of done some research on that because you don't want too much of one or the other. My stories, I probably tend to have a little bit higher percentage of dialogue than maybe other writers do. I appreciate that in a book. That's one of the reasons I am a big Elmore Leonard fan because, things are
Yeah.
condensed and I find that more enjoyable to read. Um, but yeah, it's a balance you have to strike, and you have to think about that. Sometimes I think I have too much dialogue, but you want that broken up here and there by a little bit bigger of a paragraph.
Yes. Yes. I agree with you. And it's a hard. I'm at the very beginning of my novelist career, assuming there's a career there. Um, but I see that, and I took, I wrote some exposition on one scene, and then I sat down to kind of clarify what I was wanting to say. And so I wrote about 4,000 words of dialogue, and I realized, this is going to be just for me. It'll never show up in print, but it's how I have um, come to understand what's going on in the dynamic of this family that I'm writing about.
Yeah. Well, it when was writing screenplays, one of the first things you learn is every single word on the page should have a purpose. And I try to apply that same philosophy when I write my novels. It's maybe not quite as critical. You can have a couple of words maybe that don't contribute much, but everything should move the story along and every word should be there for a specific reason. And if you read back through it and realize, okay, I could have described that in 2 words instead of six, then 2 words is usually going to be better.
My first writing gig, I was as a community columnist, and I had 500 words to write. And what I learned to do was abandon modifiers, adjectives and adverbs, and run-on sentences and ands and and buts and howevers
Right.
and um, and that all those things don't clarify anything. They actually obscure the message of whatever you're writing.
Right.
That was what I learned early on.
Yeah, I've picked up some pointers like that. Stephen King is famous for saying the road to hell is paved with adverbs. And
Is
while
that right?
I don't completely subscribe to that, I will slip an adverb in here and there, but for the most part, you can do without them. And then the adjectives too. I learned early on one adjective at a time. So if you're describing something, just use one. Don't use three adjectives strung together with commas because that's probably too much.
So do you have do you write separately from your books? Like, do you have a Substack or a Medium page that you write on where you write about the experience of being a writer, or are you or commenting on current events or things like that?
Where I do that these days is through my newsletters that I send out to my followers. I've got
Uh-huh.
about, I have about 3,200 people following me now, and I send a newsletter out a couple times a month, and I'll talk about various experiences, often about how, how it's going with writing the next book or other things that have touched me. Most recently, I wrote about going to the Paul McCartney concert down in San Antonio, because I found that very moving.
Wow, that would be. So when you have a book that comes out, are you doing book events? Do you have a conversation like you're having with me about the book? How do you promote your books? I guess is really what I'm asking.
Podcasts are an excellent way to do that. I'm always open to talking to folks on a podcast. I don't scramble around like I used to, looking for physical book appearances where I'm going to a bookstore or going to a club to talk. I love doing that, and if somebody asks me, I'm there. But these days, especially for an independent self-published author, you make or break it with your digital sales, and most of those events don't really help you there.
That's right. When my book Circle of Impact came out in 2018, I spent the next 10 months doing about 40 uh, book events in bookstores across the country, and it was great. And what we discovered, I had a team that had helped me put this together, and we had a difference of opinion about who the audience was, and I had to prove that they wanted me to write for a particular role in an organization, like a CEO or a CFO or a HR person. And I said, no, the book is not for that. It's for people who recognize they're in transition, and that leadership is a form of creating change, and that change is a form of transition that they can live into and become a different person because of that. And so I went out to kind of discover whether that was true or not, and I did find that it was true, but I didn't sell a whole lot of books. Uh, but I learned about the audience, and so I knew what to write about the next time I began to write, and that was really helpful.
Well, my first book was in 2004. It was a nonfiction book about Austin. It was a then and now book, historic pictures, and then go back in the same spot and take a picture. And there were no online books. I mean, there was no way to sell it digitally. So I had to have a whole bunch of books printed. Um, when I wasn't sure anybody but my mother would buy a copy and fill my garage with them, and then I set about trying to speak before every group in Austin and Central Texas. And I must have given over the next few years a couple of hundred talks and sold a lot of books that way, by the way. I really enjoyed doing it, but these days that was a much easier sell because it was nonfiction. It had a topic that almost
Yeah.
every Texan is interested in. But selling a Lions Club or a Rotary Club on the notion of you coming to talk about your novel is a whole different story.
Not that
And
the same.
I haven't really aggressively tried to do that.
Yeah.
I've I've hit up a couple of book clubs and they've been glad to have me, and I may try to do that. And that's more for fun though than anything else. You'll sell a handful of books, but it's not gonna make or break you.
So, this is my kind of my last question. So, where do people go to find your books, or to find you? Yeah, find your
Well, they're
new.
all on Amazon. They can also look at my website, which is jeffreykerrauthor.com. And Jeffrey is Jeffrey, and that describes all the books as well. So those would be the two main places. And the books that are on Amazon, they're all also in Kindle Unlimited. So if you have that, then of course you can read them without paying anything more.
Are you are you doing audio versions of your books?
I paid for an audio version of my first book about year and a half ago. And last spring, I signed with a small publisher that kind of specializes in finding independent authors, Vinci Books. And they're eventually going to do audiobooks of all of them. They just haven't gotten around to it yet. But yeah, audio is a big market these days.
Yeah.
They're
I,
also going to do translations, they say. German translations in particular. That's a real hot market that I'm anxious to get into.
all of those things are very current for me as well as my my book was translated into Chinese, and I was kind of surprised because it's not a corporate type of book, but that's it's okay. But yeah, I think audio versions, and I think, for example, I used to live in Wyoming, and I've driven out there, I've been out there twice this year, for 3 or 4 weeks at a time, and when I drive out there, I listen to books, and on my trip out there in June, I listened to William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury twice, once on the way out, once on the way back. And it is very different listening to that than reading it.
Hmm.
And I've found that there's a flow to language that's heard that's not, it's different than the flow of language that's read. And I think it's a really I think they're significant enough for them to be two different books.
I think that's a good point. I never listened to audio until a couple 3 years ago when my wife and I started to make frequent drives to and from Colorado. And she said, "Well, yeah, let's get some audiobooks." And that's where the Jeff Carson series I mentioned, 22 books. I haven't read any of them. I've listened to all of them on audio. Driving to Colorado, and it's with a good narrator, man. That'll make the miles
Yes.
fly.
Yes, that's I agree. Well, I've enjoyed meeting you, and I wish you well as you continue to write your books. And if you send me whatever you want me to put in the show notes that
Okay.
point us to where you're writing and how to sign up for your newsletter, and send me any kind of images that you'd like for me to use, I'd be glad to do that.
Oh, I appreciate that.
And
I meant to ask you something. Do I remember right that you lived in North Carolina for a while?
I live there now. I
You live in
ha
there. Where do you live?
I live in Winston-Salem.
I spent 5 years there 100 years ago. Loved it.
Well, I grew up here, and at 18, I left, vowing I'd never return. And then a year and a half ago, I did return, found a house to buy, and so I'm living downtown, and it's been quite an
Oh,
experience.
nice. Yeah, downtown.
So were you in med school here?
I did my residency there at Bowman Gray.
It's great. It's a
And then
great.
I stayed, that was 3 years. Then I stayed 2 years on faculty. And this was 86 to 91. So it was a very long time ago. But yeah, it was just a wonderful place, I thought.
particularly if you're in the medical field. It's such a dynamic place, and
Absolutely, yeah.
they've really excelled in the whole medical innovation world.
Hmm.
And it's going to be interesting to see how all that unfolds continually. But yeah, I it's good to be home, and
Yeah.
but I also miss living in Wyoming. So
Well, I know what you mean. Coming back to Texas was coming home for us, and I haven't ever regretted it. But usually around mid-August, September, when it's 110 degrees, I'm thinking about North Carolina.
yeah, well, I went out in late September to Cody, and I lived in Jackson when I lived out there, but I went to Cody and hoping that I would be able to catch some snow before I had to leave to return home, and I didn't make that. Now they're getting the snow. So,
Right.
well, thank you, Jeff. I wish you well and your continued success in your books, and I will look forward to reading them.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Ed. And I'll send you some information.
Okay, and thank you all for watching. I hope you'll go buy his books and get involved with the next great crime author of our century.
All
So
right. Thank
as
you.
you can quote me on that.
Okay. I may do that.
Okay, and we'll see
Take
you
care.
next time here on the Ag
Okay.
Network podcast. Bye bye.